All right, so let's delve a little deeper on that statement of cash flows. The statement of cash flows is made up of 3 different sections. So the statement of cash flows, we said it shows all of a company's cash inflows and outflows, and that's true, but we're actually going to show those inflows and outflows in 3 different sections. Okay. Operating section is the first one, followed by investing, and then lastly, financing. Okay, so let me define and tell you what you're going to see in each one of these sections. And honestly, sometimes this is the hardest part for students, is just when you're given a transaction, seeing which category does it fall into. So let's make sure we really understand the definitions. So in the operating section, you will find items that determine the company's operating income. Okay, some examples of that include sales to customers, payments for regular business expenses, right? So payments for regular business expenses. So think of like rent, salaries, etc. So I basically think back to that income statement from like chapter 2, right? We had your revenue and you just had expenses and you just listed all the expenses, salaries, rent, advertising, interest, right? So basically anything that shows up on that income statement, at least in the operating section, before we get to non-operating, that's a different story, that is all considered operating cash flows, assuming those expenses were paid in cash and the customer payments were in cash. Okay. All right, next we have cash flows from investing activities. So these are going to be either cash inflows or outflows relating to long-term assets. Relating to long-term assets. If you think back to that classified balance sheet from chapter 5, you basically have 3 categories of long-term assets, okay? Financial investments, intangible assets, so patents, trademarks, copyrights, things like that. And then finally, plant, property, and equipment, which we covered extensively in chapter 11, right? And that's really what we see more in this class, financial investments and tangible assets, that you really deal with more in the later accounting class. Okay, so anything related to long-term assets, you buy a long-term asset, you sell a long-term asset, all those cash flows should show up in the investing section. And then finally, you have the financing section. This is cash inflows or outflows relating to long-term debt or equity. Okay, we've spent a lot of time with long-term debt and equity over the last few chapters, right? Bonds, stock. Okay, so bond issuances, for stock issuances or anything related to that. Okay. All right, good job.